Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of W.W.A.A Podcast. I'm your host, Kristy Mickelsen, and for those of you not familiar with me, I am a romance book author and an advocate for causes such as cancer, autism, and lupus awareness. You can find my books on Amazon.com and other online retailers, and you can follow me on most social media platforms, including X.com at Kristy Books. Tonight, I'm joined by two wonderful people, one of them being my co-host, Billy Dees. Billy, how are you?
I am absolutely fantastic. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Bill. And our special guest tonight is Stacy Widelitz. Stacy, how are you?
I'm good. It's a little rainy outside, but I'm inside and dry with my dog, Max. So I'm good.
Hello there, Max. Well, you know, Stacy, I know quite a bit about you already, but our audience doesn't. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to our audience?
Oh, okay. I'm a number of things. I'm a composer and songwriter and photographer. I grew up in New York on Long Island, where I started playing clubs professionally when I was 15 years old. And I started writing music and getting paid for it when I was about 19. Moved to LA when I was 25 after having co-written the theme for the Richard Simmons show, which became a big hit. And spent 19 years in LA writing music for TV and film. And did a lot of scoring work, some episodic stuff like Beverly Hills 90210, a lot of TV movies. And then along the way was lucky enough to co-write the song She's Like the Wind with Patrick Swayze. And eventually moved to Nashville, where I am now. And got very involved in the arts world and took up photography a number of years back. So, you know, it's fun, keeps it interesting.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot to dig into here. Yeah. Let's start out with your love for music. How did you get a love for music? Was it something you were born with? I mean, how does one get a love for music like that?
I think so. I think it's also what you're exposed to. My parents were not musicians, but they were they had an artistic bent. And there was a lot of music in the house all the time. And what was nice was my father was a big fan of jazz and classical music, and my mother was a big fan of show tunes and folk music. So that gave, kind of a broad soundtrack in the house all the time. I never knew, is it going to be Mozart today, or is it going to be Pete Seeger or Mahalia Jackson or somebody like that? And my first foray into music was actually a disaster, which was in 4th grade. I joined the band program and I was assigned the flute. This is public school on Long Island. And I could not
be the one. Yep.
yeah. And I could not make heads or tails of that thing. And eventually the band teacher, Mr. Severoli, sent me home with a note to my parents. This is after about a month and a half. And the note said, please return Stacy's flute to the rental agency. I'm dropping him from the band program as he exhibits no musical ability whatsoever.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, and which was, a little crushing.
Harsh.
Yeah, a little harsh. But around that time, my father had picked up an old beat up upright piano, which he put in the basement. And I would pick out tunes with one finger on it just by ear. And my father had bought a method book, which I didn't really look at. But then when I was about 8 years old, that same year, it was now the winter of 4th grade, my cousin was a child prodigy classical pianist. And he was about 14 at the time. And he was stuck at our house with his mother in a snowstorm. And he was downstairs playing Chopin on the piano. And I was enthralled. And he looked at me and says, let me see if I can teach you something. So he taught me how to play chopsticks. And then he opened up the method book and said, well, let's see what I can teach you from here. And after about an hour or so, he ran upstairs and told my parents, you've got to get him piano lessons because we just went through the first 10 weeks of lessons in an hour. And,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was obvious that the flute was not for me, but the piano made more sense. I mean, it's different. It's logically laid out, and it just visually appealed to me, and the sound of it. So my parents started, getting me lessons, and then when I was about 13, to their horror, I announced that I was going to become a musician. And but then, within a couple of years, was playing clubs. So so
that's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah, that's what started, the love of music. Yeah.
I think that's pretty awesome. A lot of the people that have come on the show that have been musicians, composers, and all that have all told us they started with piano. So I think that's pretty cool. And I think usually Bill asked that question. Sorry if I took that away from you there, Bill. No, everything, but no, let's go back just a little bit. You said you co-wrote the song "She's Like the Wind" from the famous movie Dirty Dancing. How did that come along? How did that come about?
Well, after I'd moved to LA, I moved to LA with my then girlfriend, Wendy Fraser, who's a great singer, who actually is the woman singing on the song "She's Like the Wind" toward the end. She's the one that comes in with that, kind of duet. And if you look at the album, it says Patrick Swayze featuring Wendy Fraser. And a friend of mine had asked me to accompany him on piano in his acting class. He was doing a scene for his teacher from Shenandoah, and he knew I was an experienced accompanist. And so I said, sure. So we did the scene in the class. It's like 60 students in the class, fairly high-level, famous class in LA called the Beverly Hills Playhouse. And the teacher was a guy named Milton Katselas. And it turned into discussion. My friend Gary did a great job with it, and it turned into a discussion about theater and music and theater, and the teacher involved me in the conversation since I had some background in theater. And then the class took a break, and I was gathering up the music, and this guy came over to me, and he introduced himself as Buddy, and he had kind of this Texas drawl, and he said, I really like your talk about music and theater and all this. And I looked at him and I said, you look really familiar. And he said, well, have you seen The Outsiders? And I said, no. And then he said, have you seen Runaways? Renegades, that was it. And I said, no. Now he's getting annoyed. And so I said, it's not that kind of, it's like I've seen you around familiar. And then this blonde woman came over, and he introduced her as his wife, Lisa. And I said, okay, now I know the two of you are always working on a black 240Z on La Jolla Avenue on the weekends. And he said, yeah, how do you know that? And I said, I live right around the block from you. I see you every weekend. And it was 2 houses away. And that was Patrick Swayze, who family and friends called Buddy. So that's how I always knew him as Buddy. And, so the 4 of us became friends, me, Wendy, Lisa, Buddy, and we started hanging out. And I had a background doing some music for dance, and they were both dancers. And then I think it was 1984, he called me. He was working on a movie called Grandview, USA. And he said, hey, Grandview's looking for songs. I've had this idea for a song for a while. I can't really get anywhere with it. Do you want to work on it with me? So I said, yeah, sure. Come on over. He lived around the block. So he came over with his guitar, and he had a background in music. He'd been in bands before, and he was on Broadway and Grease. And so he knew how to sing. And he had 2 chords and a lot of verses. And the first 2 lines were, she's like the wind through my tree. She rides the night next to me, which I thought was intriguing. And then I told him I didn't like the 3rd and 4th lines, which, he looked and he said, well, what would you say? And so I just thought, and I said, she leads me through moonlight only to burn me with the sun. And he said, what does that mean? And I said, I don't care, just write it down. And And then we were kind of off and running. And the turning point was when we realized that She's Like the Wind could be the title of the song and the hook rather than just the opening line. And we moved it around musically. And then we did a really good demo of it with him singing it, my girlfriend on it. I programmed all the synthesizers and drums, brought in the guitarist. But ultimately, the song was not used for Grandview. And 2 years later, it was he played the demo for the producers and director of Dirty Dancing, a project I knew all about. I had already met the writer and choreographer Kenny. And Buddy called me from North Carolina where they were shooting, and he said, hey, they want the song for Dirty Dancing. And to be honest, I wasn't that excited about the prospect. I thought, okay, nice. But it was a low budget movie, and the word on the street was it was going to be terrible, and it was going to head straight to video after 1 week and be totally forgotten. And of course, that's not the way it went.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one more question before I pass over to Bill and see if he has anything he'd like to ask for a few minutes.
Sure.
Everything. You've done a lot in your career. You've done a lot. What do you think has been the most rewarding? Has it been your time working with Patrick, or has it been something else in your life that you felt is the most rewarding?
Well, it depends. If it's music, then, definitely She's Like the Wind has to be a high point, because I think it's every songwriter's dream to come up with a song that's an evergreen, that will still be on the radio, still be on the radio after decades, and not only in this country but worldwide. It was a hit in like 20 countries around the world, and so that's huge. But on the scoring side, there were some documentaries that I did for ABC World of Discovery that I loved, especially one on the black rhinoceros, interestingly called The Last Charge of the Rhino. And I really put a lot into that. And I ended up getting nominated for an Emmy for that score, and that was very gratifying.
Awesome.
Yeah, but all of that. Also getting the end title song to Pocahontas 2 for Disney, that was fun and gratifying. But it's all gratifying. I mean, to just have a career as a composer is an amazing thing. There are actually less working composers than Major League Baseball players. So that gives you a sense of how exclusive that club is. So to have any type of career in it is incredibly gratifying.
Well, I think that's wonderful. And I've heard She's Like the Wind. I have the soundtrack running around somewhere. It's been a while since I picked it up, but I do have it. And I think you've done a wonderful job. You and Patrick did a fabulous job with that song. At first I wasn't too keen. And then when I started hearing it over and over when I'd play the movie, because I loved the movie, everything, I was like, damn, that's some interesting lyrics. She's like the wind. And then I would start taking it and trying to figure out what it meant. And then the more that I started picking up on it, the more it really stuck with me. And it's been with me for a long time. So congratulations on such a job well done, you and Patrick.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's definitely fun. I mean, I've heard it in such interesting places, like walking through a food fair in London, and one of the vendors had a boombox, and it was playing on his boombox as I was walking by. And that's pretty disorienting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then hearing it in a mall, that was early on. Then after Wendy and I broke up, she and I were having an argument on the phone, and it came on the radio in my neighbor's apartment. So it's like I had provided my own underscore for that scene. And then, I've had people sing me the entire, like I had somebody in France like sing me half the song, and that's
wow.
That's pretty amazing. So just the reach of it is astonishing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and pass to Bill for a few minutes because I know he's usually got some interesting questions for our wonderful guests. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, don't build me up too much. I don't want to disappoint everyone. Um, let's start with the scoring because I find that very interesting. When we talk about scoring, the names that kind of come up are like John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, those types of individuals. Is there anybody that you really like when you hear they've scored a movie or a TV show? Is there somebody that, man, I really want to hear what they did with that?
Well, there's some classic composers that are still my favorites, especially Bernard Herrmann, who had the great collaborations with Hitchcock. I mean, also think about it. Bernard Herrmann's first movie that he ever scored was Citizen Kane.
Wow.
And that's an amazing score. But, you know, he did Vertigo. He did, obviously, Psycho, you know, those.
Mm-hmm.
But among more contemporary composers, I have I think Tom Newman is unbelievably talented. His brother David's no slouch either. And David's also an excellent violinist and conductor. But yeah, and Jerry Goldsmith is somebody that I always admired. I mean, he could do just about anything. Who would be the other one? Elmer Bernstein was another one.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
You know, he did everything from Animal House to A Sweet Smell of Success, which is an incredible score.
Yeah. I've heard Spielberg, I believe, kind of intimated this. I hope I'm translating it correctly. I know myself, me personally, I think the classic orchestra, when it comes to scoring, has a range that for example, Jaws, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, all of those. I don't know that they would have been as impactful with a rock and roll soundtrack. You know, you had to have this dramatic. And I think an orchestra has the ability to convey love. It can convey fear. It can convey all these emotions. I'm kind of leaning towards scoring, kind of on the Spielberg side. I think you need an orchestra for that type of movie. Do you have a preference when it comes to arrangements for scoring?
Well, it depends on the project, because like you said, you know, the big orchestral score for the big, massive movie, you have to have the sound that matches that. But there are other instances where you can go a little more minimal. Like one of my favorite film noir movies from the late 40s is The Third Man, with Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten, directed by a British director, Sir Carol Reed. And that entire score, it's post-war Vienna, all black and white, and the entire score is on zither, on one instrument. And an orchestral score wouldn't have worked as well in that case, because the atmosphere created by the zither is incredible. And then speaking about, I think it was Jerry Goldsmith or Elmer Bernstein. I can't remember which one of them did the movie HUD. I think it was Jerry Goldsmith with Paul Newman and Patricia Neal. And that score is all on guitar. And it works beautifully. Again, black and white, takes place in the Texas flatlands, so it's very stark. And and there were cases, what was the movie? Labyrinth, I think it was. Something like that, where Jerry Goldsmith had done a big orchestral score and the director threw it out and brought in, I think, Tangerine Dream, and they did a synth score, and it worked great.
Interesting. Yeah. Great point. TV is kind of another thing. TV for a long time relied on intro themes, you know, Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah.
Sammy Davis Jr. and Beretta. You know, I could go on here. The theme from Friends. You know, all those. It seems like in this day and age, TV theme songs are kind of a thing of the past. You just don't hear them anymore. My understanding is that networks feel that they have like 23 minutes or whatever because of commercials, and the theme song just cuts into what they would do with the program.
Yeah.
And plus they're expensive. So they decided, we're not going to do that anymore. I kind of feel that it has taken away from, to me, a big hit, with Mike Post, let's say, for example, and Miami Vice. All those, I think, added to a culture that was around that show, and you just don't have that anymore. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I was lucky enough to, be a little bit in the era where there was still a theme song. Like my first national credit was with Wendy, actually. The two of us, I was 24 years old and she was 23. And we co-wrote the theme for the Richard Simmons show.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a full, good 30-second theme that set up the feeling of the show. Like there was a cold open, then the theme came on with the visuals, and it really set the tone for the show. And then I did a cartoon series for ABC where it was a full 1-minute intro with lyrics. It was a show called Crow. And so in that case, I wrote the music and produced the music, but I also wrote the lyrics for the show. And in trying to figure out how do I write an effective theme song that has to last 58 seconds, basically, I turned to the classic, which is Gilligan's Island. And I thought, okay, it's 4 verses and it does some, things in there, but it tells the story perfectly. So when I wrote the lyrics, I actually wrote it to the Gilligan's Island theme, but then we wrote all the music, made it kind of more of a rock and roll thing.
Interesting. That's fantastic. I'll ask you one more kind of nerdy tech question. Somebody like yourself, you came up through the age of, the analog, whether it be the Ampex big multi-track reels and all these things. And now, of course, you have the digital consoles and the memory and all these other things and a million different effects. And computers now can help you with backing tracks and rhythms and all these other things. Has the technology helped the artist, or in some way has it taken away from the creative process? That's something I'd like to ask Paul McCartney if I ever had the chance. But what's your opinion on that?
I was an early embracer of the technology. I got into synthesizers very early. Like I got my first synthesizer when I graduated high school in 1973. And it's nothing like the synthesizers you would get now. You could play. The synthesizer I had was called an Electrocomp, and it was very revolutionary. You could actually play 2 notes at a time on it, because before that they're all monophonic. So you had, like, if you listen to the work that Wendy Carlos did on Switched on Bach, that's all line by line by line on an analog tape recorder. But as I had the first version of Pro Tools, I got my first Mac to do sequencing in 1984.
Wow.
So I found that it made life easier. I learned how to do scoring in a very traditional way with stopwatch, what's called pops and streamers, which are put on by the music editor, and a time clock, and beats per minute. It's a whole thing. But once the computer technology came along, it was like, oh, that makes it actually enhanced what I had learned, because I knew how to do it from scratch. And then the technology just added speed more than anything else.
Interesting. Well, that's an interesting. I really enjoyed hearing you answer those questions. I really enjoy hearing from creative types, especially ones that have produced a number of different types of, genres and styles. So thank you, and I'll turn you back to Kristy.
Okay.
Wonderful questions and answers, gentlemen. I want to jump over a little bit and talk about the mental health side of being a writer, being a creator. There's been a lot of people that I've come across in my life who've been creators, who've been musicians, actors, the whole nine, and all of them have stated at some time or another they've had to deal with the stresses, the depression, sometimes of the fame that comes along with it. Have you had to go through any personal struggles throughout your career? And did it come with a price tag? Did it come with any depression or stress or anything that could really knock you down for a while. How did that go for you in your life?
Well, I think you're drawn into the creative environment because there's already something in you that may lead you to depression or circumspection or trying to figure out what is it that makes me tick. And I knew from, I always had like a little bit of darkness on the edges, and I knew how to manage it. I mean, I knew that if I was sinking into some sort of depression, which would happen every now and then, that I'd get through it. And I remember once hearing an interview with the great director, Mike, it just went out of my head, Mike Nichols. And he was talking about how he would finish a project and then spend 6 months curled up on the couch in a fetal position watching daytime television. And then he would get up out and say, okay, it's time. I'm ready. And you have to learn to cope with it. You also, when you're in a creative field and it's a business, you have to learn how to deal with the rejection. And you have to learn how to not take it personally when, of course, it feels incredibly personal. As far as dealing with fame, fortunately, nobody knows who the hell I am. They know what I've done, but they don't know me. So I haven't dealt, but I've seen, especially being friends with Patrick, I saw what, his superstardom did. It was difficult for him to cope with at times. And I think it's one of the reasons that we stayed friends was that I was always very honest with him, and we never really yesed each other. But it is hard. It's a very, very difficult business. I don't think people understand that it's incredibly demanding, and one of the biggest demands is time. That especially in my line of work, I was under tremendous deadlines all the time. And it's not a matter of, oh, I'm working on this score. I think I'll get up. I'm feeling kind of like this way today. No, it's like you get up, you start working on it at 9 a.m. and you maybe are finished by 6 p.m. for the day working on it. And then you kind of just crash. And then you get up the next day and do it again. And until the project is finished. And because in composing, if you deliver late, it's the end of your career. So the deadline pressure was just enormous. And I always say it's not a business for the faint of heart. You've got to have some guts to deal with it. It's I remember a great story about I think it was Eric Korngold who did the score to Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and all that. Korngold, I can't remember. But anyway, it was an interview that I heard with his wife, and she said he would go to bed every night crying hysterically, saying, I can't finish this. I can't do it. It's too much. And she would just calm him down and say, look, it's okay. You've done this before. And you kind of have to talk yourself into it. So, but it can eat you up. Fortunately, it's not as bad as something like acting, where the rejections are very, very personal, because the rejections can be based on how you look, or whether you're too old, or whether you're too this or that, and that can really play with your head as well. So it's definitely a very tough business.
Absolutely. And I completely tip my hat to you and to anyone in the entertainment industry. I think it was last year, if Bill might be able to remember, I'm not sure. I think it was last year I started acting and modeling classes and all that. I've been doing podcasting for 2 years and writing for 6 years. I wanted to try something different, maybe go into commercials or something. And because I'm 47, because I'm short, I'm only 4'10", everything. And because I'm a little chunky, I've always been chunky all my life. I didn't get very many roles and everything. I was watching other people, get up there ahead of me. And I kept wondering, what the heck? What the heck? Well, honey, there's not much for people that are in their 40s, and there's not much for people that are short like you, and there's not much for people who are a little heavier than you. And so I went crazy trying to diet and all this stuff. And then I finally decided, you know what? I'm very happy being me, and I'm very happy podcasting. I'm very happy writing my books and being the mom of my 2 autistic kids and being a wife to my wonderful husband. I think I'm just going to set that part aside because it would get to me. It would really get to me. And so I always ask my guests on here that are in the entertainment industry how they handled it. How did they handle the pressure, the stresses? Even now, today, I have a lot of people that, hey, Kristy, we know you. And if I'm playing around in the store with my husband, they're like, oh, I'm like, I'm human, people, So a lot of stress and a lot of pressure goes on the entertainment world. So I tip my hat to you, and I tip my hat to anybody in the industry.
It's interesting that you say that. When I was in 8th grade or so, I was a short kid growing up. I always said I had the quadruple whammy in junior high school, which is, of course, junior high school in public school at that time was like Lord of the Flies. It's like it's like absolute mayhem of cruelty. And I was a year younger than everybody because I'd been skipped a grade. I was short, I was a heavy kid, and I had a girl's name. And so I was like the butt of every bully and all this. And when I was in 8th grade, I was kind of on this cusp of, do I want to be a musician or do I want to be an actor? Because I really enjoyed being on stage. My mother was an actress, and I read a lot of plays and watched her doing community theater. But I had this self-realization that in my heart, if I became an actor, I'd want to be the leading man. And looking at myself in the mirror, I said, you're never going to be the leading man. And so I thought, maybe go to the music, because it's not based so much on my physicality. It's based more on what I can do. And so that was kind of that, flexion point in a way of just determining the course of the career, because it's like, I'm going to be I'm going to be cast as the funny dad. I'm not going to be cast as Errol Flynn. So it's so it became more comfortable for me to be behind the scenes, but yeah, it's very pressurized.
Absolutely. And, I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of people are too shy or too proud to come on and tell how they felt going through everything. They don't want people to know the struggles that they've had. They don't want people to know, oh my gosh, I've been short and I'm overweight, or I'm this or I'm that. So I tip my hat to you for sharing your part of the story. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, it's very crucial to my development, because somebody once said, once asked me, what is an essential element to being successful in music or any of the creative arts? And I said, probably stubbornness more than anything else. And because you have so many people around you that try to tear down your dreams. Family, sometimes with family, it's legitimate because they're genuinely scared for you. They're concerned, you're entering an incredibly competitive field. That was the way my mother was, even though, she came up in the arts. She was very, very terrified for me. And then also weirdly friends sometimes. It's like you learn how, whom to trust, because sometimes friends, or acquaintances, they're like, well, what gives you the right to pursue your dream when I haven't pursued mine? And I sometimes lecture students, and I remember there have been a few times where in the classes I say to the students, okay, raise your hand if you want to be a songwriter, raise your hand if you want to be a composer, engineer, and they raise, and I said, okay, now raise your hand if you've um, had difficulty with your family based on your career choice? And every hand goes up. And I say to them, I say, that may be the most difficult element for you to deal with, because it means that you're going to have to be very self-reliant, and you're going to have to look within yourself to overcome not just your own doubts, but everybody else's doubts.
Absolutely. I love sitting here talking to you because you're hitting on things that I've either dealt with or friends of mine have dealt with. And it's more, to me, I really like digging into the artist. I've heard a lot of people, asking a lot of the tech questions and, about the career, but I like learning about the artists. And today you're getting a mix of both between Billy and I, because he likes to talk about the tech and I like to talk about the artist. So I thank you for coming on here. And I'm going to go ahead and start winding down a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you something I ask most of my guests, and then I'm going to pass it over to Bill for a minute for his closing thoughts, and then we'll wind down. If you can tell our listeners one thing about you, from you, it doesn't have to be from a magazine or anything, but what is something you want our listeners to really know about you, the musician, the composer, the photographer? What do you want everybody to know about you?
Well, I think we've touched on some of it, is that a lot of people view me as being incredibly, self-confident, and, I've been a leader of arts organizations. I was even elected official here in Tennessee. I was vice mayor of the city of Oak Hill, and which is hysterical to me. But, so they say, wow, you put yourself out there and you ran for office and you did this, and you started doing photography and then became a thing, and, and all this. And basically, I'm still that incredibly insecure person looking at myself in 8th grade saying, no, acting may not be the way to go. And it's that element of overcoming. That's I think the one message that I would, try to put out there is, you've got to constantly overcome yourself, and that's an inner struggle, and the whole thing. Make it look easy, but it or I know how difficult it is. So I think that answers your question, but I'm not sure.
It actually does, and it's a wonderful message for our listeners out there, and I thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and pass to Bill for his final thoughts, and go right ahead, Bill.
Just one quick question. I noticed you're the president of the Nashville Opera Guild, and opera, if in the classic sense, whether it be like Carmen or La Boheme or any of those, I don't know that art form gets enough respect. Often opera is the butt of the jokes, and everybody thinks of the Marx Brothers. Was that a high C or a vitamin D? That type of thing. What's your feeling about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, my exposure to opera came fairly early with Gilbert and Sullivan, whom I loved. In 5th grade, again, public school, Long Island, the music teacher, Mrs. Marinelli, they put on the Mikado. And again, because I enjoyed being on stage, I was cast as Pooh Bah, one of the, kind of co-starring role, very good role. And then the following year they did HMS Pinafore, and I got one of the lead roles as Captain Corcoran, captain of the Pinafore, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And but still, the more serious side, because those are comic operas, I started getting into more later. I think opera is sometimes something that you appreciate more as you mature.
Yeah.
Because the themes are, usually somebody dies at the end, or somewhere during the opera. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions. People think of like the movie Moonstruck, where everybody's in a tuxedo and a evening gown and all this, and it's not nearly as formal as that. And it's you have to remember that a lot of the composers wrote for the people. I mean, Mozart wrote the Magic Flute for the general populace. That's why he had it. That's why the libretto is in German, because he wanted it to be appreciated by everyday Austrians. In that case, I think he was living in Vienna, and but opera is a form of theater that incorporates everything. It's got acting, it's got singing. Sometimes it has dance in it. It has elaborate sets and costumes. So it's like everything. It's an all-encompassing art form, and that to me is what makes it interesting and beautiful. And yeah, I was the president of the Opera Guild for 2 years, which is now called Friends of Nashville Opera. We rebranded it so that it doesn't have the word guild, which sounds like something from the Middle Ages. Therefore, even more promoting, further promoting the idea that it's old-fashioned. And then before that, I was actually president of the board of the opera, which is, a separate thing. So I've gotten matter of fact, this past Saturday night was the opera's, Nashville Opera's big gala called La Bella Notte. And they presented me with an award for what I've done for the organization. And it was fun because Kristen Chenoweth was there, and she was getting an honor as well. And she and I talked, and we had actually met like 12, 13 years ago. So I reminded her of that. And she's a big fan of She's Like the Wind. So, but yeah, so I would, to dispel some of those notions, it's like, just sit back and listen to it. Don't go in with expectations.
Yes.
But at the same time, watch the Bugs Bunny cartoon. There are two where there's where it's a spoof of Wagner, and Elmer Fudd is in the helmet and a spear, and he's singing "I will kill the wabbit, Wagner. But there's another episode that uses opera that's even funnier, where Bugs, his rabbit hole is next to door to an opera singer, and Bugs is constantly interrupting his practice. It's unbelievably funny, and for a little kid, it's a great entree into the world of opera.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you for that perspective. I appreciate it. Kristy?
Stacy, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show today. Really quick, where can people find you online and learn more about you?
Well, there are two ways. I have a website, which is constantly a work in progress, which is just stacywidelitz.com, all one word. And then I use Instagram only for my black and white photography, which is, like I said, it's become a thing. I've won awards. I've had 4 shows. I've sold numerous pieces. And that's at Stacy Widelitz on Instagram. And I'm always, every few days I post another photo. And I've been traveling quite a bit. I put up recently, photos from Amsterdam and Spain and Paris. I've fallen in love with Paris and I'm learning French. And it's, so that's a way that they can take a look at what I've been doing there. And then on the website, like the homepage is the story of She's Like the Wind and how it was written, and a fun picture of me, Patrick, and Gloria Estefan.
Oh, wow.
I've actually seen that picture, and I plan on using it as part of my promo here.
Oh, okay, great.
Beautiful picture of all three of you. Yeah. All three of you look really wonderful in that. And about your photography, before we jump off here, I'll make it very quick because I know time is running short and everything. But when did you start with photography? I don't think I jumped into that.
It's about a little over 9 years ago, and it was quite by chance. I attended a songwriter's workshop in Italy, in Tuscany, at a villa outside of Florence. And it was a friend of mine that organizes these workshops, and leader of the workshop is the great songwriter Gretchen Peters, whom I admire enormously. And she was, obviously going to be there with her husband, whom I knew is a great keyboard player, Barry Walsh. And my friend Lydia, who organized it, was going to be there. And about a week before leaving, I thought, I take pictures when I travel with my iPhone and a crappy little camera. And I thought I need a better camera. So I bought kind of a mid-level Sony travel camera. And in playing around with it, I noticed it had a black and white function. And I grew up obsessed with black and white movies, like I've mentioned, The Third Man and film noir. And all of a sudden, when I looked through the viewfinder of this camera in Florence, Italy, I was in a Fellini movie. It's like everything was in black and white. Everything was shadows and light. And so I started taking pictures of people rather than buildings. And a photographer friend here in Nashville saw some of them online on Facebook. And he encouraged me, said, these are really good. You need to start bringing a camera with you wherever you go. And that's how it started.
Well, it sounds absolutely fabulous. I'm going to check out some of the sorry, everybody. I'm going to check out some of that photography.
Sure.
And do you sell any of it by chance?
Yeah, there's a gallery downtown that handles some of my work. And I've sold, I think, 16 or 17 pieces.
Wonderful.
And I had a show at Nashville International Airport up for, how long was it up? 4 months, ending last year, and a couple of different galleries. And I'm friends with photographers around the world. I belong to these street photography Facebook groups, and it's become like a whole other unrelated creative endeavor, although it is related in a way because it's still storytelling.
Absolutely.
Just with just in a different medium. So it's been a fun journey, very unexpected. So that's what makes it fun.
Well, it sounds like you've had a wonderful array of projects in your life, a lot of wonderful careers with the music, photography. Would you consider it more a hobby or more a part of your career, the photography?
Well, it's become a little of both. I mean, I have a friend who asked me, he says, you've pushed yourself hard on the music side. Are you going to do the same thing with the photography now? And I said, God, I actually hope not. I hope that I keep the enjoyment on it so that it's a little purer and not so much a business. Because the thing is, yeah, you love music, but when you go into it as a career, it's a business. So, and you have to take it seriously in that way. So this, I'm trying to still keep it just a sense of discovery and a sense of fun.
Absolutely. Well, again, Stacy, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show tonight. And anytime you would like to come back on and have a discussion with us, we would love to have you back.
Sure, anytime. Just you know where to find me. So.
Yes, I know. Bill, really quick, where could people find you online?
Probably the easiest place to go is the old Twitter, which is now X, at Billy Dees. And you can find the Billy Dees podcast on Facebook as well. And of course, you can find the podcast itself, which is just Billy Dees podcast on anywhere. We have about a 10-year history on all the major platforms, so really easy to find. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. And always, you can follow me, ladies and gentlemen, like Bill, on x.com at Kristy Books. And I'm on all social media platforms between TikTok, Instagram. I'm everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. So be sure to look me up. And I just want to leave the show with this little message. If you can dream it, you can achieve it. And we've been talking to someone who has had a wonderful career. So he is an example, ladies and gentlemen, that if you can dream something, you can achieve it. And with that, I'm going to say good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.